Hello, this video is about my build of the MPC 22-inch Eagle transporter from Space 1999. I'm sure if you're watching this video, you're familiar with the TV show made in the 1970s by Jerry Anderson and Sylvia Anderson. The Eagle transporter was the primary vehicle featured in the show, designed by Brian Johnson, special effects by Brian Johnson and Nick Alder, and a really fantastic team at Pinewood. You know, just great space shots that any feature film would have been happy to have in there, and the design of the Eagle itself is just terrific. If you Google, greatest spaceships in movies and TV, the Eagle will always sort of be in the top 10. It just, it looks the part. It worked in the show. The detachable modules and the interiors too all sort of worked, and it was totally believable. And the special effects were terrific too. I mean, it was an absolutely credible piece of hardware. I'm old enough that I saw Space 1999 when it was first shown in the 1970s. It was, it was really cool. I bought the kit they had out at that time, which was, I think MPC made that, or Airfix issued it here in England. It was about 12 feet long, and again, probably if you're watching this video, you're aware of that kit and probably have it and or built it and know what a ghastly kit it is. It just doesn't. It's not accurate at all. In any aspect of it, and and the way they did the cages and the rigging is just, it's terrible. And I have a fondness for it because I built it a few times, and it's all there was, other than the dinky two die-cast Eagles. Again, if you're watching this video, you probably know this. They did one with the passenger module, which was white, but the rest of the ship was green. And then they did one that was white, which was a freighter version, and had a red freighter section, which looked a lot better. But what everyone did was they got both of them, and they took the passenger module out of the green one and put it in the white one, and had a pretty decent version of an Eagle to deal with. And then, if you're like me, you also had the MPC kit, and struggled to make that look reasonable. Article I know. I think it was called Fantastic Modeler or Sci-Fi Fantasy Modeling. It was this great article on like how to make the best out of your MPC Eagle. But yeah, so when this was coming out, it's like, oh my god, an actual real proper kit of this great ship. It was very exciting. So anyway, you can tell my thoughts on it. I love it, and it's great to see this kit, which is really well engineered. It goes together, almost falls together, and more importantly, the level of detail and accuracy that they've put into this thing is fantastic. As people probably know, a lot of these models have kit bashed details from other things, and you can really pick out the individual pieces on this. There's bits of a Tiger tank on the sides, and interestingly, you can see parts of the lunar module that is from the Airfix 144 scale Saturn V kit, I think, and certainly parts of the service module, which is again from the Saturn V or the Saturn 1B, and it's exactly twice the size of the replicated piece that's on this, which makes sense because this is a 22-inch model. Builds up into a 22-inch model. The original models were 44 inches, so it's kind of a half scale model of the original models, or a 1/48 scale model of the imaginary Eagles themselves. So it's kind of interesting. If anyone out there does a 2/88 scale service module kit, and you happen to lose your front bulkhead, you could take this piece and put it on there. That's just an example of how thoroughly they've gone through this thing. And Brian Johnson, who designed it, his name's all over the box. I mean, he clearly endorses it, and again, rightly so. I mean, it builds up and looks like the real thing, which is fantastic. Okay, so going into a few details, it's a very modular design, and it's a very modular bit of construction. There's the command module or beak at the front. In Dragon's Domain, we were talking about this with some guys at the Telford IPMS, and in Dragon's Domain, Alan Carter refers to the front bit where the pilots sit as the command module, but I've always referred to it as the beak, and I think maybe Lookin' Magazine called it the beak, or maybe there's an episode where they call it the beak. If anyone knows, what the correct terminology is, that'd be great. But for me, if Alan Carter, calls it a command module, that's good enough for me. So anyway, so yeah, there's the command module, the passenger module which detaches, and then the sort of landing pod sections, the engine pods and the engine bells, and then the sort of the two pieces which I guess are the fuselage in between. So anyway, going through each piece, start with the passenger module. Interestingly, I mean, it looks great. Of course, there's absolutely no detail in there at all. There's no indication of anything. I think it's a very faithful reproduction of probably the studio model that didn't have anything in there. But there are windows in the top, so I thought, well, it needs something. So I built very roughly, looked at some episodes and did a couple of screen captures and just put something in there, put some walls, service area at one end. For the doors, because there's nothing in there, I basically took a photograph of the door in the Eagle one, in the Eagle cockpit, and just printed that out on paper at the right size and glued that in, just paper glued onto the plastic with Yoo-hoo glue. And then for the sort of control panels and other areas, I made in Photoshop just some blue-gray sort of patterns with lights and that kind of white line detail. It's not accurate at all, but it looks the part. And then I just found a few little pieces of from the spares stash that I kind of put in there for details, and little bits from old toys that sort of resemble seats. So if you look in there, and you can see in these stills, there's something. It's not accurate, it's not beautifully done, but it's it's something. It's there, and if you do look through the window, you can see it. Interestingly, when I was doing the research, the live action set has no windows in the ceiling. There's nothing there. So bear that in mind if you're super detailing it. That they're actually the two things actually don't correspond that way. I'm sure that was a practical economic choice when they were making the show. The other thing about the passenger module is, like the whole kit, it goes together, really, really well. There isn't anything to support the sort of main oblong flat top piece. Once it's all built up, that basically you can glue it at either end, but then it just sort of, is freestanding in the middle. So I just cut a little piece of plastruct and put it midway, super glued that in, so that then when I put the oblong in, I could sort of, stick it to that, and that was something that kind of held it in place so it would be flush. I don't know if other people have had that issue, but it just, seemed like it needed a little bit more there. Something else, when I was putting this together, I don't think I got it all 100% straight, so there are some sort of seams and things that needed to be sanded, and I started trying to correct that with filler and sanding, and it was sort of spiraling into a little bit of a nightmare situation. In hindsight, it probably wasn't that bad and I should have left it. But anyway, what I did was I decided to just make a little sort of flange, a little sort of bulkhead, just put on there that would be one piece that would go over all those joins and end pieces, just so that it looked, so it looked good. And it looks pretty in keeping with, I think, what they might have done in on the show had they had that design. Anyway, it's not screen accurate, but it's it kind of works. Interestingly, potentially, I took a photograph of the end of the passenger module, scanned that into Photoshop, made the shape that I wanted out of that, and then my wife actually has this really cool little machine that cuts out vinyl stencils and very thin plastic card, it turns out, and I was able to cut two of these things out identically and then just glue them on the ends, which was a fun use of the wife's gadgets. I did toy with the idea with the passenger module of making it detachable. I was like, oh, maybe I can put some magnets in the spine, and then I did actually cut out a couple of metal plates from the top of a tin of cat food and put those on top of the passenger module so that it would be held in. And even though I kind of tested it for weight and stuff, when I actually had it all said and done, it would hold it in place. If the Eagle was just sitting there, it would be fine, but you couldn't really move it around at all or pick it up and fly it around, should you be so inclined. So I resorted to screwing it in, which is obviously why the screws are there and why that's the way they did it in the original one. So no problem there, but that was an interesting little diversion. Elsewhere on on the ship. The engines, you can get these great aftermarket engines that are actually made out of aluminium, I think, both all the vertical jets and the big thrusters at the back. But they're about £100, I think, and I didn't, couldn't invest in that. So I sort of went down the old tried and tested route of. There used to be a thing called Metal Coat back in the 80s, and it was a Humbrol product, I think. It was an enamel paint, and you basically painted it on, and it looked matte, but then you could buff it up, and it looked really terrific. But you can't get that anymore. So I looked around for a few things. I could not get hold of it. If anyone knows where you can, please add a comment below. That'd be fantastic. So it was really great stuff. But in the end, so I looked for different options that would act in a similar way. Couldn't really find anything. The best thing I got, my wife again actually saved the day. She got this this pen that's basically a chrome paint pen, which is, it's like magic. It literally, you sort of draw it on and it really is chrome, and as long as you get a smooth, put it on a smooth go, it looks great. So I ended up using that just on the trim at the back of the engine. But for the rest of it, I tried numerous things. I tried tin foil and sort of rubbing that down, which looked really good. I also had some self-adhesive metallic foil that looked good, but it was a little bit thicker, so it lost a bit of the detail. But the issue is, because the engine's curve in a couple of different directions, you need to make it in pieces, and there's going to be, or at least with cuts, so there's sort of be seams, which obviously aren't there on the real thing. So that was going to be a bit of a problem. I was thinking I could do it in a certain way and basically hide the seam sort of on the internal non-visible or least visible part of the engines. But to be honest, that sort of very chrome look wasn't, I don't know, it just wasn't looking that great to me. I mean, I know that's how they are on the original and they look terrific, but for whatever reason, when I was doing it, for me, in this scale, whatever reason, it just wasn't working out. So I ended up, painting them matte black and then painting them gunmetal and then black washes. I ended up using a little bit of the chrome pen. I made a little pool of it and then dry brushed some of that on. Got some 3B pencil, sanded that down, smudged that on with my finger. Lots of different things. So I don't know, what other people have done, going the non aftermarket route, but I sort of wanted that slightly used, slightly sort of brushed. For the rest of the ship, it's it's white for the most part. It does have separate panels picked out depending on the model. Again, those fuselage pieces, the bits that in between the engines and the passenger module and the command module and the passenger module. There's a couple of areas where there's no detail. They're smooth, which again I think is, I'm sure, correct to the studio models, but for some reason it just looked a little bare, so I grabbed a few little bits out of the spares box and sort of put those in place just to flesh it out a bit. And then I did a little bit of weathering, just in light grey, just a very light wash around a couple of those areas. Because when you look at the Eagles, they're really clean. I mean, they've got sort of panel lines and a few little bits of weathering, daily use weathering, but they're nowhere like a Star Wars ship. They're not dirty or anything like that. They are actually sort of very clean. So I wanted to sort of find that balance between picking out the details that are there, but also giving it that kind of they keep it clean. They don't have anything else to do there on Moonbase Alpha, so I guess they can keep these clean. But I did put that detail on, did a little bit of weathering, and also put a few little markings on their Letraset dry transfers, which are fantastic. And I got sort of, I think 3mm or anyway small lettering, and they come with little bits of punctuation and just dashes and lines and little triangles and stuff like that, which you see on the Eagles, and all the Jerry Anderson hardware has that kind of level of reality in there. So I wanted to make sure I added a couple of those pieces, a couple of that idea to the bits that are then sort of behind the cage, just so they're there. Got that all finished, and then put the cage together around that. I will say again, I can't speak highly enough about the way this thing is engineered and planned, but the spine, you look at it and it's a bit nerve-wracking because it, basically holds the whole thing together. But if you follow the instructions, all the individual, slats and the bars are all, machined and are all at the right angle. So once you glue them in the right places, the whole thing, goes together at all the right angles. It's straight. It's fantastic. So I super glued them just to make sure I didn't want anything kind of coming loose. But that worked out really great. That was a worry that was not warranted. It just looks really good. Back at the command module, the detail you get in there is what's in the studio model, apparently. So you don't get a full cockpit. You basically get a bulkhead with a door, and then two astronauts kind of get glued on that I think match the 1/24 scale Gemini astronauts they put in there. But anyway, you paint them to look in the alpha colors, and they give you really great, again, more great transfers, decals, and they really kind of look the part. Again, you can't see a whole lot once the windows are in there, unless you're going to put lighting, which I was not. But yeah, so you put those in there. I did add a little bit of floor just in front of the doorway, because you might see that, and that is kind of a semi-prominent feature. Anyway, I just glued in a piece of plastic card there. Rest of the hull, for the whole thing, I used Humbrol white, just matte white spray for the whole thing. So I want to make sure I kind of got all the ins and outs of it done. And that's sort of something, talking of the ins and outs, like any model, but certainly with this many parts, you're going to get some flash and seams and stuff, and that really doesn't bother me. I've been back since the 70s, so that's just part of what you do, is you just clean up that sort of stuff. That's no issue. But the interesting thing about this is that because it's so sort of skeletal, certainly in all those cage pieces and the rigging, any seam lines, it's not like a fuselage where you can kind of clean up one seam line, but then the other side of it is not seen because it's enclosed when you put it with the other part. This thing, you see the front, the back, the top, the bottom, the sides, so sort of every angle of it, you have to kind of clean up those seams, which was just so kind of like, wow, I've never had to do this before to that degree. But that's fun, and it's sort of worth the extra time, I think, to do it. So the hull, getting back to the painting, so the painting of it, it's all sprayed matte white, and then individual panels here and there are picked out just in quickly mixed up colors and slightly lighter gray, blue. Again, all the models, or certainly in the episodes, vary a little bit, so you can have a bit of artistic license there. And then to indicate the paneling, I dry brushed or sort of semi-dry cotton bud, smeared on some just subtle streaks using the hard edge of a piece of tracing paper, so that was flush against the model, and then you just rub a little bit of cotton bud dry brush over it, and then you kind of get that hard edge and drag, which is quite prominent on the original models. They also have some what look like drawn on panel lines, so I used a fine mechanical pencil and a straight edge and just drew some of them in. Some of those I would smudge with my finger because there were pencils, so you could drag those as well. So that's sort of applied over the whole ship. You get a great set of transfers, water slide decals with the kit. So a lot of those little sort of, like I was talking about with Electroset, you get a lot of the little sort of markings and shapes and whatever technical don't walk here and all that sort of stuff all over it, which look great. What you don't get, which I did find quite interesting, is you don't get any markings for the spine or any of the cage work, which you can see quite clearly on a lot of the models. So I basically got some Scotch tape, painted some of it red, orange, some grey, some black, and then cut out tiny little strips of that, maybe millimeter wide, 1.5 millimeters wide, 1/4 of an inch long, and then just wrapped those around the various bits of the cage work and the spine work where they should go, and they look pretty good. I certainly don't have the skill to hand paint those on, and I suspect when they did the ones on the original models, they may have just used some tape for it. But anyway, that's what I used, and I really think you need them. You need those markings there. They're quite prominent. The landing gear, you have a neat gimmick. The kit comes with springs, so the landing gear compresses when you sort of press down on it, which is good. I did find that, to me, it looks like it sits a little high from what I've seen in the show. You could weight it down, I guess. I would recommend weighting it down, or maybe cutting the springs down, or I don't know. It kind of gets into a whole physics project of how much weight versus how much compression and all the rest of it. And I did actually make some of my own springs out of a softer wire, which I thought would kind of work, but it turns out they didn't have enough spring in them. So although it sort of sat neatly at the right height, it didn't sort of have any of that bounce. Not that I'm, this isn't for filming or playing with, but it's fun to just, press down on the thing and have it little spring up. But, and again, because I was trying to have a detachable passenger module, I didn't want to weight that because then it would have been even heavier. So anyway, long story short, I think there might be some aftermarket springs, which maybe have it sit at a better height. I didn't really research that. If I were to do it again, maybe I would invest in those. So yeah, so here's the finished thing. It's a big model. It's a nice size, 22 inches, which is just under 2 feet, or whatever that is in centimeters. Yeah, and it really sort of looks the part. I think there's great modeling opportunities. I think a lot of people out there have added internal lighting to this. I've seen beautiful builds that are way way better than mine for sure. But yeah, if you like science fiction or you like Space 1999 or you just want to build a fun model, this is would thoroughly recommend it. And it actually goes pretty quickly because it is so modular. Everything you're building at least 2 of or 4 of, or multiples of, so you can have all those going concurrently, and you can actually for the end result you can actually do it sort of surprisingly quickly if you want. So anyway, so that's it. If you've got any questions or thoughts, please put comments below, and yeah, I'll be putting out more videos shortly. All right, thanks for watching. Bye bye.